Hello everybody. So I'm watching Arrow for the very first time and I have made it to season 7, so today I'm going to talk about it. Let's go. So last season ended with Oliver getting taken by the FBI and put in a supermax prison right after finding out that Quentin Lance died. So, that's where we are at the start of this season. Oliver's in prison, and I think that plot line that took place over like the first 7 episodes of the season, I think that was my favorite plot line of the season. I think once he gets out of prison and goes back to Star City and he's goes back to being the Green Arrow and working with the police, I think that was interesting, but it wasn't as interesting as this. I think it was just really cool to see Oliver figuring out how to, adjust to prison life and how to, trying to stay good while also, working with the other prisoners, trying to get information from them that he needs against Diaz and stuff. And so it was cool seeing this conflict of like he's trying to stay good, but he has to compromise in a few spots and has to do some morally gray to just bad stuff. And I mean, Dark Oliver is always more interesting than Happy Oliver. The Oliver that is, crosses lines sometimes to get what he wants. The Oliver that isn't afraid to do some bad stuff, to kill people, to hurt people. That's always the more fun Oliver. At least, for compelling stories to like watch that. Obviously for an ending of a season, you want Happy Oliver with Felicity married, having children and stuff. But, for a compelling story of a season, Dark Oliver is always more interesting to watch. So I'm glad that we got to see some Dark Oliver here, morally gray Oliver here. So, yeah. I think that's a reason why this worked a lot better than, the rest of the season, because, the rest of the season, we're having Oliver really at his most light state. Like, he's working with the police. That's as morally good as he's ever been. He's not, in the shadows trying to, work against the law. No, he's working with the law, alongside them, with the police. So, yeah, that was obviously not as interesting as Oliver, Dark Oliver, morally gray Oliver in prison. But eventually Oliver gets out of prison and goes back to Star City and, again, works with police, goes back to being the Green Arrow. But before this, we get to see what the other members of the team are doing while Oliver is in prison, and they're all still trying to, do good, help the city, just in more law-abiding ways, not as vigilantes, since last season the anti-vigilante law was passed, so they can't be vigilantes anymore. They were able to get immunity, when Oliver turned himself in, just to be able to stop Diaz, or just for, that time at the end of the season. But since then, they have to, stop being vigilantes. So it's immunity in the sense that they aren't going to, be put in prison for being vigilantes, but they just have to stop doing it now to get kind of a clean slate. So none of them are vigilantes anymore, and again, they're trying to help in a more law-abiding way. So Dinah is the police captain now, and Renee's sort of working with her. I don't know, he's probably doing things the least law-abiding way out of all of them at the beginning of the season. We have Diggle and Curtis are both working at Argus, and Felicity is working with Black Siren Laurel, who's now the DA, because she's now pretending to be Laurel from Earth 1. So she's the DA now, and Felicity's working with her. So I guess that's sort of law-abiding. And overall, I think it was just interesting to see how each of them are, trying to still help, trying to still do good, even though there's no Team Arrow anymore. And I think that makes the show a little bit more grounded that way, because when you have a whole team of heroes in this lair with the suits set up on mannequins and weapons everywhere and the whole computer set up and stuff, that's a bit much. Of course they go back to that by the end of the season, which again, that's I think why the end of the season didn't work as much as well for me. But yeah, so having them trying to all help in their own ways, in more law-abiding ways, I think that made it more grounded than how it had been. With everybody with their own suits going out every night fighting crime, it's like I think this is again a lot more grounded. But eventually, again, Oliver gets out of prison and he decides to go back to being the Green Arrow, but this time working alongside the police. And this time, not wearing a mask, not even putting his hood up, having his hood down the whole time, because obviously he told everybody who he is at the ending of last season, so there's no need to hide his identity anymore. So he is now just going out, just, with the suit on, just showing his face, and working with the police, which I think that was an interesting new dynamic. Even though I don't think it worked as well or was as interesting as the prison stuff, I still really enjoyed him working with the police, that new dynamic. Whereas for 6 seasons, he's been working, outside of the law, working sometimes against the police. Here, for the first time, no secret identity, working with the law, with the police, and I think that was a really interesting new dynamic, having him have to adjust to that, having to adjust to working with the law, and not just by himself, not just outside of the law, having to, play by their rules. I thought that was an interesting new concept, a new dynamic, having really the whole team, because eventually the whole team gets deputized and is working with the police. So it was cool seeing the whole team have to adjust to this new, I keep saying dynamic, but I'm sorry, I'm going to keep saying it, this new dynamic, working with the police, playing by their rules, and kind of there starts to be a conflict there where, because now they're working with the police, now they have to play by new rules, they kind of feel like they're constrained to, they can't do the things that they used to be able to do because they're working for the law. Felicity can't hack into all these things that she wants to hack into because that would be illegal, and they're working with the cops, so they can't be doing illegal stuff. So, I thought that was really interesting to see. But now I want to move on and talk about the flash forwards this season. I think this was a nice way to kind of replace the flashbacks of the first 5 seasons, because obviously last season didn't have any flashbacks except for episodes that made sense for that. And I think that this was a good way to kind of replace the flashbacks. Have the 2 stories going on like they've always have been, but instead of going back 5 years to Oliver, stranded on the island, learning how to be the Arrow, the Hood, whatever. Instead, since we are kind of done with that, they go to the future, 20 years into the future, to see William when he's older, Roy when he's older, Renee's daughter Zoe when she's older, Oliver and Felicity's daughter Mia when she's older, and we get to see all these characters 20 years later, where they are then, this kind of, dystopian world, this dystopian Star City. I thought that was surprisingly interesting. I think it did. It was a bit hit or miss. Like there were stuff that I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting," and other stuff where I was like, "Yeah, no, just go back to the present day stuff." But I think overall, I really surprisingly enjoyed this plot line, this storyline of the future. I was a bit confused why we were seeing this at first, but then as you know, once you get to the finale of the season, you realize, oh, this what we're seeing here is the effects of the final moments of the season, the effects of Oliver getting taken by the Monitor and dying in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that's kind of how this, this is what we're seeing, the result of that, in a way. So I kind of got a better idea as it went on of why we were seeing this. But even if it didn't tie in at all, it was still a pretty good plot line that, again, I surprisingly enjoyed. It was definitely a really good version of the type of thing this is, which is, going into the future, seeing the children of the heroes that we, the characters that we see in the present day. We see what their children are doing, and a bunch of other franchises have done this type of stuff. Even DC has done this kind of stuff before in other movies and shows, and it's cool to see that. It's usually not done very well, but I think it was done fairly well here, and I enjoyed it. Again, very surprisingly enjoyed it a lot. It is a bit annoying that it kind of makes the present day stuff of the season prequels then, because it makes it so now you have to show how everybody got to where they are in that where we see them there. They have to explain, how did they get there, how did this happen, so it makes it so the present day stuff becomes a prequel when you do this, but I think that was fine. It was a little bit annoying because, like, inherently, when you have a prequel, when you have to make something a prequel to something else, you have to, force some things to happen in the way, force people to end up in a certain place because you said they were there in the future, and so. But anyway, I think it still worked out fine. And so basically the plot of the flash forwards is that William, 20 years in the future, he has the arrowhead that Felicity gave him, and he gets a message on it that has coordinates which lead him to Lian-Yu, where he finds Roy, and they both go back to Star City, because new coordinates come onto the arrowhead to send them back to Star City, where they team up with Oliver and Felicity's other child, Mia, Renee's daughter, Zoe, and Diggle's adopted son, I forget his name, which I'm not sure why they made him his adopted son and not just his biological son. I don't know what the significance of that is going to be. Maybe that's going to be shown in Season 8 of Arrow. But yeah, I don't know what the significance of him being his adopted son rather than biological son is going to be. But they also team up with him to take down this computer program or something that Felicity created called Archer that's being used to basically destroy Star City. And so they were able to take it down and save Star City, and it ends with the 4 younger characters, William, Mia, Zoe, and Diggle's adopted son, becoming the new heroes of Star City. And I thought this was a really interesting plot line. It was cool to see all the different characters where they are 20 years later. Somehow Roy ends up on Lian-Yu. I'm very excited to see why that happens, how that happens. And then, of course, we had to see Renee's the mayor. That was cool. Uh, Dinah is still being the Black Canary, but she's actually created this, I guess, society of women called the Canaries, who, go out and fight crime and stuff. So that was cool. Felicity created Archer and got captured by the bad guys and forced to make Archer something that can be used against Star City. And yeah, it was just cool to see where all the characters end up. Oliver has died by this point, because we find out at the end of the season he dies in Crisis on Infinite Earths, but I'll get to that later. And overall, I just really enjoyed this flash forward. Very surprisingly enjoyed this storyline. I think it was a really good version of what this type of thing is. I think it was a good version of that, better than I expected it to be. So yeah, I enjoyed it, and I think it's going to continue in season 8. So I'm excited to see where this goes then. But I'll jump back to the present day stuff and talk about Emico, Queen. Or I guess she's not really a queen, but Emico, Robert Queen's daughter from an affair, and she is another person screwed by the queens. She is another reason why Oliver's parents are the worst people ever. So Robert Queen has an affair, has a child, Emico Queen, and has to leave his other family, because he obviously has his family with, Moira, and he has to leave them and go and just, be with, Moira, Thea, and Oliver, and so he has to leave them, and Emiko has a lot of problems with that because her father just left her, and she always wanted to be part of the Queen family, but, because this was an affair, nobody could ever know that she was his daughter, and so, yeah, again, another reason to add to the long list of reasons at this point why Robert Queen and Moira Queen were the worst people ever. So she ends up being the new Green Arrow of Star City. While Oliver's in prison, this new Green Arrow shows up. Everybody's like, who is it? Is Oliver out of prison? What's happening here? It ends up being her. It's never really explained why she dresses up like Oliver, why she's the Green Arrow, like why that's what she chooses to be. It's never really explained, but that's what happens. And the reason why it's particularly confusing is because it's revealed that she's working with the villain, Dante. And then she ends up finding out that Dante killed her mother, and so she ends up killing Dante, and then she becomes the main villain of the season until she ends up getting redeemed by Oliver. And there was a weird thing throughout this season where she's kind of going back and forth. Like, I think even the writers, I feel like, didn't know whether or not they wanted her to be good or bad. It kind of reminded me of how Carly Morgenthau was used in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. How it just really seemed like the writers went back and forth so much with, whether or not she was good or bad. And it was just really confusing because, like, obviously, at the start of it, you think she's good. And then it's revealed she's working with Dante, so you're like, oh, she's bad. But then you find out that she's only working for Dante because she was kind of forced to, so then you're like, oh, so she's good. Then you're like, oh no, she's actually just working with Dante because she wants to, so you're like, oh, she's bad. And then you're like, oh wait, but she kills Dante, so maybe she realizes that Dante's bad and she's gonna be good now. Oh no, she's still bad. But then she gets redeemed by the end, so then she's good again. So yeah, it was really confusing whether or not she was good or bad. I think even the writers didn't really know whether or not they wanted her to be good or bad. So I think, just like Carly Morgenthau, Emico wasn't really used the greatest. There was really just too much back and forth with it to really be interesting. It was just really just confusing at that point. and I think it would have been better to just have her just be bad by the end of it. But anyway, during a portion of the season where we think she's bad, we find out that she knew about the Queen's Gambit. She knew that it was sabotaged, and she had the chance to warn Robert Queen about it, but didn't, and so she is partially responsible for his death and for Oliver being stranded for 5 years and for this whole thing happening. So I thought that was an interesting new detail to throw in, and it just makes it a little bit weirder to have it be like, oh, but she's good at the end. She gets redeemed at the end. Like, just have her be bad. But yeah, she gets redeemed by the end, then immediately dies because you have to have a person who killed a bunch of people and then gets redeemed. It's kind of the rule. It's kind of the Darth Vader, Kylo Ren rule, where once they get redeemed, you kind of have to kill them afterwards because they've done bad stuff, and so you don't have to deal with the consequences of that later. You just kill them off, and like, they died a hero, instead of having to, have them get redeemed and then have to go back into society and have to deal with the consequences of having this character who killed a bunch of people try to destroy the city, going back into society and trying to be good and like, oh, everything's fine now. Like, no, you tried to kill a bunch of people. So yeah, she gets redeemed, but then immediately dies because of that whole rule with villains getting redeemed. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. That happens in the finale, and I want to jump back to, I think, one of my favorite episodes from this season, which is the documentary episode. So in this episode, basically the premise is that a documentary crew has come to Star City and is doing a documentary on vigilantes. And throughout the episode, it kind of goes back and forth between the documentary style and the actual style of the show. You get to see through the lens of the documentary crew at times, and you get to see various characters get interviewed on it, but then it also goes back to normal style of the show for to show the actual story of the episode, which I thought that was cool. I like when movies and TV shows like use different styles of filmmaking and stuff, going back and forth between two different styles. I thought that was really cool. But anyway, just wanted to point out I really enjoyed that episode, but I'll move on and talk about Felicity Is Pregnant. We find that out in the middle of the season, and we find out that the baby she is pregnant with is Mia in the flash forwards. Mia Queen or Mia Smoke. I can't remember which one she actually is.
Because my name is Mia Smoke.
But Mia, we see her in the flash forward storyline, and throughout the season, Felicity is pregnant, and they're hiding that from the rest of the team for some reason, which is basically just to have it be a surprise to the other characters when they find out who she is in the future. I think there's really no reason for them to be hiding that from them. They give some reason. I think at the time I was like, oh, that's a pretty good reason. But really it was just to have it be a surprise for Dinah and Renee when they're in the future timeline and they find it out. But I thought that was cool. And we, of course, get some cute Felicity moments from this with that. So yeah, that was cool. Felicity's pregnant, and it's cool that they were able to tie that into the future storyline. We also get Roy again this season. I'm so happy that we're getting Roy back. He left towards the end of Season 3, and we've gotten him periodically since then. We got him once in Season 4, not at all in Season 5. We got him for 2 episodes in Season 6, and we have him again here. And in the episode where he returns, that was another one of my favorite episodes this season. The mystery of, who killed the 2 guards, what actually happened. Like, the whole storyline is 2 guards were killed on a mission that Team Arrow went to, and the cops think that Team Arrow killed the 2 guards, and they're trying to figure out which one of them did it. And so this was fun, getting each of them getting interviewed, each of them giving their story of what happened and their perspective of what happened, and then eventually seeing what actually happened at the end, where we find out that Roy killed the 2 guards. And at first you see it and you're like, wait, is this Mirakuru or what's happening here? And we find out it's bloodlust. It's from the Lazarus Pit. So, last season, he went off with Thea and Nyssa to go destroy the Lazarus Pits that Malcolm Merlin left a map for. So, apparently, on their quest to destroy the Lazarus Pits, Roy died, and so Thea and Nyssa, when they found one of the Lazarus Pits, threw him in there, had the Lotus thing. I forgot the Lotus thing existed. That's why in the last video I said, get Constantine. You just use the Lotus. That works also. So they had some of the Lotus thing and threw Roy in, gave him the Lotus thing, and apparently didn't work all the way, I guess because of the Mirakuru. And so I guess the Mirakuru changed him, and so that somehow made it so the Lotus didn't work all the way. And here we see bloodlust. He kills 2 guards, and so the rest of the Team Arrow cover for him, and they tell the cops that Emico killed the 2 guards, but they act like the whole time they're hiding something, so they could, they can make it seem like they're just trying to hide that it was Emico. They're just trying to protect her, even though who they're really trying to protect is Roy. And even Dinah's in on it. She was the one interviewing all of them, which adds the other layer of believability to their story, that somebody who was involved in it is interviewing them. And so yeah, I thought this episode was great, that because I was wondering, watching that episode, how are they gonna give a satisfying payoff to that, because I was like, it can't just be that Emico killed them, that's not a satisfying enough reveal. And then finding out Roy killed them because he was brought back in the Lazarus Pit and he had bloodlust, that's a satisfying explanation for it. And it's also a satisfying payoff for the Lazarus Pits being brought back, because in the last video I was like, okay, they have Lazarus Pits, I hope they aren't used, but I feel like they have to be. Why are you gonna introduce new Lazarus Pits and then just have nobody get brought back? Well, the person they bring back is Roy, and I think that was the best way to handle this, because again, you can't just bring back Lazarus Pits and have them not be used. And so I think this was the best way to use them, to bring Roy back and to have it be this twist reveal, where he kills 2 guards and you're like, why did he do that? Because the bloodlust that we've seen Sarah had, that we saw Thea had after coming out of the Lazarus Pit, Roy has it now. That was great. That was great payoff for that episode, and great payoff for the Lazarus Pits. And so, like I said, they all cover for him. They all say Emico killed the guards, and it seems like they did a good job, that they successfully were able to cover for Roy, except we find out that Emico took the security footage that shows Roy killing the 2 guards. The rest of the team thought Felicity did it. Felicity thought that Dinah did it, and it was Emico. She took the footage, and after the team gets finished covering it up, she gives it to the cops. She gives the footage to the cops and shows them Roy killed the 2 guards, and that severs the ties between the cops and Team Arrow, which obviously I think we all knew that was going downhill at some point in the season, and it happens here. Emico gives the cops the footage of Roy killing the two guards, severing the ties between them. But then it pretty much gets resolved anyway, like in the next episode. And the finale comes right after the episode where that happens, and it gets resolved almost immediately. But it was cool that they at least did that. Which, I guess that brings us to the finale of Season 7. And this was a pretty good finale. It was good enough. I think it wrapped up the season storyline well enough. It was just kind of stopping Emico in the present day timeline, in the future timeline, taking down Archer, and that happens. The team wins both. It's not really that crazy. It's not really the best finale, of course, except for the last 5 to 10 minutes. That's amazing. I think that's the best ending of any Arrow season ever. But besides the last 5 or 10 minutes of it, the rest of it, pretty generic finale, just wrapping it all up. Again, like I said, they start out, they're like, oh, the ties between the cops and Team Arrow are severed, they're not working together anymore, they've lost their trust, and then it gets resolved almost immediately when the cop that knows that, that Team Arrow are good wakes up and is like, oh yeah, we could trust them now again. Okay, that lasted for 5 seconds. Anyway, Oliver goes up against Emico, who's trying to destroy the city using DJI Mavics, and they get into a fight, and eventually Emico is able to realize that what she's doing is bad and able to redeem herself until, like I said before, immediately right after getting redeemed, she dies because there's the whole rule of villains. You have to kill them off after they get redeemed because you can't deal with the consequences of them actually getting redeemed and going back to normal, and have to deal with the consequences of having somebody who tried to destroy the city and kill a bunch of people and actually did kill a bunch of people, have to, deal with the consequences of that. So, she gets redeemed, she dies a hero's death, and, I think they did a good enough job with that. Of course, just they followed the rule that they have to do with that, but it worked good enough. So, with that, Team Arrow was able to stop Emico's plan, and in the future, Mia, William, Zoe, and John Diggle's adopted son, as mentioned, were able to take down Archer and became the new heroes of Star City. But before Emico dies, she tells Oliver that the Ninth Circle, the evil organization she's working for, is going to go after his family and to go into hiding with Felicity and their daughter. And so they leave Star City, they go to a safe house, and it looks like they're going to live happily ever after, finally. Mia's born, and they're just living their normal lives. It seems like they're living happily ever after. Until the Monitor shows up. Remember the Monitor from Elseworlds? Remember how Oliver talked to him and seemed to have made some kind of deal to save Barry and Kara? Well, that gets brought back here. The Monitor shows up, and Oliver's like, wait, we're doing this now? And apparently, the deal was that basically Oliver has to sacrifice himself at some point in order for Barry and Kara to not die when they were supposed to in Elseworlds. And we find out Oliver is going to die in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and he has to go with the Monitor now, get taken from his family, get taken from Felicity and Mia, and that's why Mia grows up without Oliver. That's why they never contact William again. Because that was actually what was supposed to happen right before this, is they were, right before the Monitor shows up, they're talking about we should call William's parents and try to get joint custody of him. And then the Monitor shows up and ruins that whole plan, and that's why they never contact Oliver. And the Monitor takes Oliver, and that's where the season ends. I guess the season ends in the future when the Monitor shows up to Felicity, and since Felicity has seen that William and Mia can take care of themselves now, that they were able to save the city, they don't need her anymore, and so the Monitor takes her away to see Oliver for them to get reunited in a afterlife or something along those lines. She's able to get reunited with Oliver, goes through this portal, and I guess that's where the season ends. But I thought that was really cool. Because obviously Arrow is always like a more grounded show. Of course, there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens in it still. But it's always been more grounded than like The Flash. And so it's cool to have this really like wacky thing, the Monitor, show up at the end of it. And to have this thing that connects directly to Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's something that came from a crossover, Elseworlds. But like a lot of the times the crossovers, kind of get forgotten in the seasons. Like they reference them, but it's not like, it's never been something like this where something directly from the crossover has come back into play in a season of the show. And so it was so cool to see the Monitor show up and say, Oliver, you die on Crisis on Infinite Earths, and you need to come with me. You made this deal to save Barry and Kara. You need to come with me now. And that was so cool to see that. It gets me so hyped for Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I just can't wait to see what happens in it. Obviously, we know Oliver dies, because that's one thing we know happens. I know happens, but I'm so excited for it. Yeah. And so I'm thinking that because of the ending of this season, I'm guessing that season 8 isn't really going to be like a traditional season of Arrow. I'm guessing it's going to be more like set up for Crisis on Infinite Earths. Having Oliver with the Monitor, I guess, training or whatever he has to do for whatever happens in Crisis on Infinite Earths. And then, obviously, Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, Oliver dies, and then the rest of that season, the last 2 episodes are kind of wrapping up the show, wrapping up the series, having everybody, I guess, part ways, everybody, just wrapping up all the loose ends, and I'm guessing that's sort of what Season 8's going to be. I'm guessing it won't be like Team Arrow has to take down this big villain who's trying to destroy Star City. It'll be more like just 10 episodes to wrap up the show. For the first, I guess, 7 episodes, setting up Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then for the last 2 episodes, kind of just wrapping up the series. I'm guessing that's kind of how Season 8 is going to play out. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm predicting. By the time this comes out, I will have seen Season 8 probably, so you don't have to, you could comment below whether I'm right or wrong about it, but, I'll know by the time this comes out if I'm right or wrong. But that's kind of how, at this point, I'm seeing Season 8 going. I think that's how it's going to work out, and I think that's going to be pretty cool. I'm excited to see where this is going next. I'm very excited for Crisis on Infinite Earths. This ending was amazing, and it's really gotten me hyped up for it. For something I was already pretty hyped for, it's gotten me even more hyped. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens next, what happens in Crisis on Infinite Earths. But for now, those are my thoughts on Season 7 of Arrow. Please comment below your thoughts on the season, and remember to give this video a like, subscribing to the channel, and maybe check out some of my other videos. And with that said, that's a wrap.